me 2+ hours to get home. There's an accident on the turnpike. No, twice in 2 days where I near miss. I hope so. I got a little more to do here. Thank you.
Related to this. Let me just ask him so I know.
It's a balance bar. I know it.
I got it.
Actually, I probably should hide this because it's a violation.
Good evening. Welcome to a special meeting for fiscal year 2018, the proposed budget presentation for Wednesday, October the 18th, 2017. And may we have a roll call, please?
Here.
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 Here. Here.
Here.
Here. Here. Here.
Here. Be advised, Commissioner Laurie Shriver is excused. Would everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to our Township Manager, Richard Manfredi, for a PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Before I begin, I just want to say that it's been a great privilege to spend the last 6 months, nearly 6 months here, working with this team. So the first thing you'll see is an acknowledgement, and I want to acknowledge, number one, the gentleman sitting to my right, Mr. Kevin Barron, and his team, Jeanette Herman, to the left, and all the department directors who every day throughout the course of the year do a tremendous job, not only doing the work and answering issues and concerns of the commissioners, but paying attention to the budget and making sure that they do everything that they can to make sure that we are where we are financially. So, yes, it's my responsibility to present this budget, and I'm proud and happy to present it, but it would not have happened. It must be acknowledged, the work of Kevin and his team as well, so, and all the directors. So I want to say thank you to all of them before I even begin. A couple of housekeeping items before the PowerPoint starts. We had sent out a revised memo in September, at the end of September, about dates for meetings, and we've been looking at the calendar and the schedule and the requirements under the First Class Township Code, and you'll notice that there's a budget adoption calendar that's in your information. So obviously we have this presentation here this evening, and if necessary, budget workshop is being recommended for the 26th. And then instead of the 16th, we're recommending, if you need another budget workshop, the 2nd, and then for adoption of a proposed budget at the meeting, the advertised public meeting on the 9th. Now, why this calendar? Because as you know, and you've been doing this a long time, there is a 20-day period once you adopt a proposed that it must be available for public inspection. When Kevin and I sat down and looked at the dates, the 16th would be 1 week after you adopted the proposed. And you know, if you had another meeting that night, you'd be meeting and discussing a proposed budget you just voted on, and you wouldn't have, I don't know how much changes you would make, because then you'd have to turn around and then make it available for inspection again. So kind of moving up, if you should need additional work sessions, to do it in advance of the 9th instead of after the 9th. And then, of course, the other difference is you'll notice that we have it scheduled for December 14th instead of the 21st, which is your normal meeting. And again, these can change as to whatever it is you'd like to do. This is just a proposed calendar based on this budget that's been created for you. I'm not going to get into everything that was in the budget narrative that you received, and we're going to do things a little differently, apparently. you know, Kevin put a lot of time into this budget, working side by side with me, and I think it's only appropriate that he stand before you as well and get into some of the revenue details. So I'm going to begin going through some things that will be important for you and for the public to know about this budget in a more broad overview with goals and objectives. Kevin is going to follow me, and he's going to get into some revenue and expense details. And there's a key component in this budget that's allowing us to do a lot of work in capital with a proposal that Mr. Michelow and I have discussed, and it was an initiative that he put forward that, frankly, I completely agree with. I like the concept of looking at what we do as profit and loss centers or cost centers. So I'm not going to steal his thunder, but what he's going to propose as a way of doing business going forward will really save us some money and allow us to do some additional projects. So he will be third up. And then, of course, we will sit here, and every director and other staff are here should you have any questions about any specific department, about any line item, or anything that they have planned. It's important to note that the budget you have in front of you, there are some additional enhancements in how it's presented in terms of narratives, but the requests of the departments are included. There was no deductions from what they had asked for, so what you're seeing is what the departments had indicated to us that they recommend be in the budget for fiscal year 2018. The capital projects we worked on as late as yesterday with Tim Clark, who is not here this evening, and Mike Powers also. So you have some sheets and some attachments that we'll be addressing later on as well. So everything's in the order that we're going to go through it. But having said that, let me begin by saying, number one, fiscal year 2018 budget that you have in front of you holds all tax rates, property tax, refuse, and sewer, at the same rates. So there is no property tax increase proposed. There are no dipping into the fund balance. So revenues and expenses are equal. So we will not even be going against fund equity, what I call fund equity, or otherwise known as unappropriated fund balance. So we won't be doing that either. So for all intent and purpose, as you look at this budget that's been put in front of you, no tax increase, no rates increase, and no use of the unappropriated fund balance or fund equity to make this budget work. So with that, let's begin. I've already acknowledged everyone who's worked on this. I just want to, what's the mission? As you know from our previous discussions, the mission is very simple: to serve the property owners, taxpayers, ratepayers, and all who visit Abington Township in a professional and respectful manner while delivering cost-effective and efficient services. Everything that is funded comes off of that one mission and purpose. So what is a millage? What is tax rates? What does that mean to the property owner? There are various formulas, but the one formula is based on what is your total valuation of property. And the next slide, when we get to it, will show that. But we collect 98%. It's just slightly over. I didn't put the exact number of what is billed gets collected. It's a very high collection rate. So people are paying their taxes. So if a property owner, you know, will pay $1 in property tax for every 1,000 of the taxable appraised value of property, that's the mill. And if so Montgomery County assessed valuation for an Abington Township homeowner's property were set at $150,000, and our treasurer tells us and tells me that that is the average. So the typical property owner with a $150,000 assessed value, not market but assessed, with 1 mil of taxes would pay $150. So at the present rate of 4.203, the average township taxpayer will pay $630.45 in township property taxes. Now the note at the bottom is clear. That doesn't include sewer or trash. So, but $630.45 is the average property tax bill based on our millage rate to the township. Doesn't include the county or the school district. So again, in 2017, you could see the total assessed value of all property, real property, within Abington Township was $3,405,806,344. It went up from 2017 to 2018 by $67 million. You take that divided by 1,000 times the collection rate, so you see the value of 1 mil is $3.4 million, which is up $71,000 from last year. So What that very simply means is just simply because of the increase in the total assessed valuations of the property, we realize an increase in our revenues for 1 mil by $71,000. The levies, and I've categorized this a little different, tax revenue by levy and distribution. We levy a general tax and a fire tax, but the general tax levy also supports library, parks, ambulance, and debt service. So only two levies are general, and the only special levy is fire. So we break them down this way, but even though you can literally have a special levy for other things, we don't do that. We have a general levy, which gets distributed among the others. They're not separate levies, they're part of the 4.203, minus the 0.72 for fire. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone understands there's only two levies, and that's why they're distributed differently. And you'll have to look, and I apologize, you'll see in the capital, one of the things that we have appropriated is for this room so that we can have a different and a more advanced technology. But, so I'm going to go through this with you. So the 2018 appropriations for the summary of all operating and capital funds. And I'm only going to deal with 2018. For the general fund, the total appropriations are $39,238,103. Sewer operations, $8,868,099. Highway aid, $1,767,178. Retirees medical, $1,507,500. Tuition reimbursement, $15,000. Workers' compensation, $977. And refuse, $5.867429, for a total of all operating funds of $58,240,309. And then capital funds, sewer operations, capital permanent improvement, refuse capital, and sewer capital for $2,431,271. So the total for all funds appropriations for fiscal year 2018, $60,671,580, and 2017's appropriations, $60,080,552, for an increase of $591,148. And Mr. Barron is going to get into the greater details of that. Now, I wanted to talk about those total funds, and before we get to the next slide, which shows you that tax distribution that I talked about with the percentage, the $650. So that $60 million is coming from that 10.55% of the tax bill. So 79.78% of the property owner's tax bill is going to school, and 10.55, all of that funding is coming from that tax bill, that property tax bill, and those other fees. But in the general fund, that's it. I just want to draw that distinction for anyone who's watching or who sometimes looks at their tax bill and says, why are my taxes what they are today? And for what the property tax bill is in Abington Township, that amount of money, that's $600. There is a lot of money being spent that you have been spending wisely for a number of years in how you do things, including the fund balance policy, to make sure that those numbers are sound. This next chart is really a revenue and expenditure recapitulation for operating revenues for the general fund only. This recapitulation breaks things down by category: real property taxes, Act 511 taxes, that's your earned income, your mercantile and business privilege, license and permits, fines and forfeitures, interest, rents and royalties, intergovernmental revenues, charges for services, those things that the departments actually bill for, and then unclassified operating revenues. Mr. Barron will be talking a little bit about that later. And then our operating expenses break down into classifications of general government, police, fire and EMS, engineering and code, public works, culture and recreation, library, and then other expenditures, which are debt services in this particular case. So the purpose of this table is really very simple: to show operating revenues and operating expenses, and you'll notice that those two numbers are balanced. So very simply, revenues and expenses equal, which is why we're not going into fund balance. You see the fund equity is 11,824 for total all revenue sources 51,062,952. The net fund surplus is the actual fund balance. That's the fund equity. That's unappropriated fund balance, $9 million as projected with this budget. So again, the operative point in this is revenues and expenses equal. This next chart is really very simple. It's just a further breakdown by fund to show you what the general sewer, all the operatings and capitals, just so we can pay closer attention to them and give you a larger number. Again, this is the broad brush, and Mr. Barron will deal and show you the variance of the 1633, what that number is as to what those expenses were as they rose in all funds, in the capital as well. So you can see that the net variance matches what you saw in the front. 59,000, thank you, sir. 59,148. 591, 148. And this chart really just depicts what we just showed you as to where the monies are being spent, just in a visual. The vast majority of the monies are coming out of the general fund, sewer operations. You can see highway aid, refuse, and permanent improvement are much smaller, but general and refuse are two largest pieces of the pie, and then sewer operations as well. The hierarchical structure, and as you know, one of the things that drove this year in driving forward is to ways that we can drive cost, as in any organization, is headcount, personal service costs. And so what we try to be mindful of is how do we meet those needs? And you're going to hear me talking about, not just this evening, but as we go forward, quite often, as I have in our short time together, goals and objectives and strategies for that. And I won't bore everyone with the goals and objectives and strategies that you have in the narrative, but there are very clear goals and objectives and strategies to meet those objectives that I think we're going to have to do. In order to do that, we have to make sure that we have a team of people that can achieve those things. And we've worked very, very hard to identify in a very short period of time talent who can take us to the next level. This was the organizational structure in April 2017, and I know it's difficult to read these, and I apologize, but you obviously have your township manager, your assistant township manager, who was primarily functioning as the economic development director, an office manager, and an administrative assistant. As you know from our previous discussions, I think there was a more efficient way to do that, and if we were going to spend those resources, we should try to find a better way to do that. And then we have all of the directors, and that was April of 2017. And what was the reason for all of this change? The impetus for change was some very fine people who have been working here for a very long time. Public Works Director, the Chief of Police, the Director of Code Enforcement, the Fire Marshal, and the Township Engineer who has thankfully been around for my 6 months. So I'm glad, even though he left in 16, he's been here. So I want to thank Mike Powers as well. But as you can see, all these retirements have driven a lot of our decisions. And I recognize a lot of this discussion is not new to you because we've had numerous discussions and we've had other sessions where we've gone through this. But this really is the driver for everything that we are going to be doing going forward. This is a chart that shows you the categories by function of the total complement of the township. So you can see in 2017, the total complement was 285. And the total complement will be going down by 4 to 281 full-time, not part-time. And this just breaks down by department and where those changes were, plus or minus. And as you can see, the net change is 4. And I'm not going to insult your intelligence by going through what you can see in front of you. So this is the revised organizational structure based on our meetings and discussions. And you'll notice a few things that are highlighted in different colors. And you can see how things are changing and as we discussed in reshaping. There are 2 different things that are colored. One is the orange color, the communications and public affairs position, and the other are the lighter blue. They're highlighted for 2 primary reasons. The engineering and code departments are merged, and the idea there is to, number 1, become a little bit more efficient and reduce cost and provide different services. The assistant fire marshal is highlighted because in this budget, with the promotion of the assistant fire marshal into the fire marshals coming next year, which hasn't really been made public yet, but as everyone here knows, that that will be occurring. That means that that position is still on the chart, but it is not funded. So that's why those are highlighted. And then, of course, you could see the other changes. Now, the restructuring of the engineering and code department, again, has different positions. This position, the director, who's also the township engineer, will have a construction services manager, an administrative manager, and a code planning and zoning manager, and everything else will flow underneath that. This is where I'm going to turn this over to Kevin. He's going to get into some of the greater details of the general fund revenue and expense review. And then after him, we're going to get into a capital presentation. And of course, any and all questions that you may have.
Kevin, could you introduce yourself for those watching?
Yes, I am the finance director. My name is Kevin Barron. I'm going to be going over, as it says, general fund revenues and expenditures and a couple other items to explain some of the changes and how we achieved it balancing this budget with everybody's help.
Kevin, could you make sure the microphone is...
The first slide is the general fund revenue slide, which shows you a graph of the different percentages of the revenues that come in for the general fund. As you can see, earned income tax is 20%, real estate's 20.71%, real estate's 30%. You can all see the different percentages. This is just to break out the majority of the major fees that we collect in the general fund, and the total will be $39,238,103. So one of the things is some of the big changes. Manager Manfredi alluded to the change in the real estate assessment value. That comes out to be about $308,000 in real estate taxes, about $42,000 in fire taxes. That helped a lot with balancing this budget. Earned income tax by the previous year history and this year's history, we're up in the earned income tax budget by $300,000. D-transfer, $150,000. Business privilege is doing very well. Talked to the tax collector, we're up in that $275,000. Local service tax, based on the businesses and the returns going through this year, we're up in that $135,000. And one thing we did lower was building permits. If anybody remembers last year, we had a great year in building permits. We raised it up $100,000 thinking we'd have the same thing. Building permits are down a little bit this year, so to be on the cost and to be more conservative, I brought it back down to where it was the previous 5, 6, 7 years. And the state pension is up $87,000 based off the budget. So the next slide is the expenditure graphs. As you can see, the police budget's 52% of the budget. Public Works, library, parks, it's all broken out there. I'm not going to read the percentages, you can all see that. The next slide will give you some of the changes that happened in the expenditures for all the line items. Collective bargaining agreement, the CBA for police salary and wages was up by $341,000. Per diem wages is up $28,000 in the general fund. CBA, the non-CBA salary wages is up $39,000. Part-time wages is up by $72,000 because we replaced a few full-timers with part-timers. Well, that's why that's up, if anybody wants to know that. Medical budget benefits are up $167,000. Pension is up $604,000. Everyone was going to ask why. If you remember, the previous 2 years, our interest was not as well as it should have been for the pension plans. So the MMOs are up this next year. That's what takes effect every 2 years. That's a big cost into this budget. Bond debt, by borrowing the money early this year to do some of the projects we were having coming forward. Bond debt is up, that's principal and interest is up $62,000 for the 18 budget. Contingency up $50,000. General insurance, $60,000. That has a lot to do with some insurance changes that our insurance company only billed us 50% for this year, and they billed 100% for this year. It was just part of the Heart and Lung Act that was in effect. And two things that have gone down: equipment maintenance, just purchasing vehicles and maintenance on the vehicles, since we have some other vehicles. And then the gasoline is going down $53,000. That's what helps us. And then we go into the refuse fee. As you all know, if Manager Manfredi spoke that the refuse fee is going to stay the same. This will be 4 years that the fee has not been raised, the refuse fee. Shows you a little nice graph there. Everyone doesn't like numbers can see the pretty graph. Sewer budget is going to be the same. Fee, it was in 2017. As you all know, we raised it in 2017, but before that, we had not raised it since 2011. So that was to help out for some people conserving and all that, and that stuff to balance the budget. That's it.
Ladies and gentlemen, a couple things in the general fund before we go to the capital fund. I just wanted to point out there were some changes that we made in how we account for things. And I just want to point out that no, the police department budget did not grow by the amount of money it may look like it did, over $2 million. There are some changes that we're going to need to make going forward in how we account for things. For example, in the category of the secretary in the general government area, $1.8 million for police pension was always accounted for and costed out at that area. Well, to really have a true picture of what things cost, we need to put them in their appropriate place. And we only did this in 2 locations this year just to make the point of why we're making that change. It was that, and it was the audit services. Audit services were another thing that was charged off to administration that really should have been in finance. And there are other things, such as in the general fund, general government category, there's roughly $37,000 for building expense that are charged off to the township secretary's accounts, when frankly they should be charged off to the municipal building because that's what those expenses are for. Now, we did not change that in this budget. I only pointed out the 2 just so you can understand the logic and rationale behind why, and took one of the larger ones, such as police pension. So the goal is not only from a managerial accounting perspective, but from a financial accounting perspective, to give us real numbers so we can start evaluating as we go forward. I showed you and spent a lot of time on organizational structure because in order for us to meet your goals and objectives, we have to have the team in place that can achieve the results we want to achieve and have different strategies. So I think how we're going to do this going forward through attrition, without having to lay people off, and through continuing to find ways to do things more cost effectively, will continue to drive numbers down. And it becomes very important as we start to drive true overhead costs and a true cost per hour for every position, that we put all accounts and all costs into the proper areas so we have our true cost pictures. So just wanted to touch on some general philosophies and how we're approaching things. Is there anything you want to add?
No, that was the only thing I knew we had to touch.
Okay. Mr. Michelow, if you would, please. One of the things that Mr. Michelow and I have discussed, and this is something that he had apparently brought forward in the past, but it really didn't take off for whatever reason. I'm sure there was sound and good reason. But with all of the capital monies that we're spending, and when you look at borrowing money, $3 million, one of the things that Ed proposed, which to me is a fantastic idea, and you have a handout on this, he's going to go through it, and it's one of the things that we'll discuss, is where we bring on 3 more people. He actually creates a construction team that can do a lot of the work that we contract out, not all of it, but some of the other work that will save us some significant dollars.
All right, I'm up here to talk about the new proposal that I've put forward to Abington Township. I personally think it's a no-brainer, but that's me, because anything I come up with, I think is great. But it has to do with, I think I brought it up about 3, 4, 5 years ago, and at that point in time, it just didn't seem to function right. It didn't feel right. It didn't work right. So I backed off on it back then. After a lot of analysis, after sitting down with Mike Powers and with Timmy Clark and the township manager and Kevin and Angelo and everybody else that was involved, I put together a proposal that I think will work very well for Abington Township. We subcontract a lot of our work, everything pretty much in capital, almost everything in capital, as far as roadways, as far as major construction, sidewalks, drains, et cetera, et cetera. It comes out of, it comes off of a list that Mike Powers has put together, and we call it the capital list, 5-year, 10-year capital list, whatever we're going to call it. I've noticed and I've watched things that have been done. I've seen that, and after watching long enough and realizing long enough, I know that we can do this thing in-house with the right personnel. So what I did was put this proposal together, and I'll kind of go through it fairly quickly, and then I'll answer questions afterwards. I know there's going to be some what-ifs, and how can this how can this work long-term and short-term, and what happens if we decided we don't want to ban this proposal. I've tried to cover all that, so hopefully I can have all those I can answer all those questions as they come up. We're looking to hire a crew to do our capital projects in-house. The crew will be able to do the same work that we are currently subbing out. The only work we won't be able to do is deep trenching for the sanitary sewers. We don't have the equipment. We don't have the things that we need to shore up the sides of the thing so that everybody can work safely in it. That would be beyond our abilities. So I would venture to say we shouldn't be touching those type of things at this point in time. The savings that we're going to experience allow us to do twice the amount of work we're currently doing for the same amount of funds. And as as we get to the, matter of fact, I'll just move to that now, give you an idea. Okay. Kind of a little hard to see because I definitely can't see it. But if you take a look at, I cost everything out at the max that it would cost us. And I believe we're going to come in a lot lower than what the numbers that are up there. But I wanted to max it out so that we didn't get this thing started and somebody come back and say, you lowballed us over here. So everything you see is maxed out. That's a max that we're going to pay out for wages. That's a max we're going to pay out for materials and for anything that we rent, et cetera, et cetera. So you take a look at the top. I'm proposing bringing an operator and 2 craftsmen. And we'll have how it works is you have, for certain projects, like if we're putting storm sewers in, you need a bottom man, it's what's called a bottom man, a top man, and you need a really good operator. And it's good to have a laborer to help out just to do the odds and ends, but you need 3 really qualified people. And we've been checking around. I think I know we get at least that many. There's quite a few people out there that the economy is right for this type of a scenario than making a move. I factored into Social Security, their benefits, their medical, everything else. So what it ended up costing out with the whole thing was $329,298. I broke this down into what it would take, how long would it take us to do the first set of projects that are in the first grouping, which is 800. What's budgeted for the next grouping that's coming up is $825,000. Our cost to do this, okay, materials would be $252,525. Labor would be $109,796, and that's figuring 4 months of to do this first set of projects. Equipment that we don't already have in the township, which we would have to go rent, would be maybe a track hoe or something a little larger than we normally have now. I put in there for, we don't have to buy it, we can just rent it. So I put in for any type of equipment rental that we would need. I put $20,000 in for that. Miscellaneous, fuel, any extra materials we're not anticipating, any other thing, maintenance on any of the equipment. So I put a little extra $8,000 in to cover that and all of our costs on that one. And as I said, everything is highballed and not lowballed. A total cost would end up being $390,000. 291. We have 825s budgeted right now from the is it a loan? From the loan that you took out, the $3 million loan, correct? The $3 million loan. This phase of the project is budgeted at $825,000. I know we can come in there with the right people overseeing this project at a cost of total cost $390. That includes the materials and the labor. We would end up saving $434,709. We also have budgeted. We have $1.2 million left of that original $3 million that we took as a loan. Some of the work's being currently done now in phase one. I think it is phase one, right? Phase one. Timmy's out there. He's already hired. He went out to bid, hired most of the contractors. And as you know, I think one of them is Edge Hill Road. Did some work on Fernwood, et cetera. There's some storm sewers all the way through this thing. That portion is going to cost a little less than $800,000, which is leave us about $1.2 million. The next phase of the project is the $825,000, and the third phase of the project will be about $600,000. On both projects, we're going to save about 50% of the original estimated cost to do these projects. The savings that you could take off of this, you could turn around and reuse it again, because you have a long list of capital projects. And I know there are important projects that are sitting out there that possibly should be done or need to be done. So that extra money you can reallocate towards whatever the board decides is a priority to do in the future. Run this thing the way I see it now, with the savings, the extra work that's going to end up coming out of this thing, and I anticipate this is going to take us all the way through 2018 and possibly into 2019 with the extra work that will be adding onto our current schedule. So that'll take us almost into 2019. There is also some other money that is that engineering has budgeted to maintain some of the creeks, the bridges. There's a bridge inspection every year, and there's always maintenance that the state brings back to us and says, you got to fix this, you got to do this, you got to maintain the walls, you got to clean the creek out, you got to fix walls, and you got to build walls. So that money, there's about $100,000 budgeted in that one. That's all work that we'll now be able to do in-house in addition to this work we're sitting here talking about now. There'll be some lull times, especially during snow, but they won't. We'll be able to use them back into the Public Works Department for that just a period of time where it's impossible to do any work on the outside there. They would help us out in snow and any other place, anything else we need to be done. That's pretty much, I think, covers where I'm at right now with what I believe is a really good proposal. There's some questions. I know there's going to be some questions. I think I have the answers for those questions. If in the future that you don't believe that this is a viable alternative, or if you believe that you're not going to fund capital projects in the future, then we have a lot of people who have gone into the DROP program who will be leaving in the next 2 years. So all three of these employees will be able to be absorbed back into the workforce without a problem. So you could, if you decided in 2019 that you wanted to end this program, there's nothing, nobody's hurt on this thing. It doesn't cost you extra money that won't be covered, that you won't have covered, because those employees would just slide back into the workforce and replace those through attrition, those that are already leaving.
I have a couple of questions. First, the numbers that we're looking at.
We have been driving, even when we completed this book, to make sure that you had as real and accurate numbers for this evening's presentation So those numbers Ed revised, we even met today. They're off by about $4,000 in two categories.
I
Yeah.
added something in that wasn't currently
Right.
in there.
So the goal was tonight to make sure, even if they were off slightly, that you had the most accurate real numbers tonight, not so much worried about last week. And we also met, you'll see one of the things that I gave you today was a memo, because we were working up into today on this capital project to revise this list to make it as accurate as possible and build in the numbers that it has. So if you look at the memo dated today from Mike Powers to me, that has all of these capital projects and builds in the numbers you're looking at right now from Ed. So this was a proposal originally that we started with, and this is all we had until today, which was September 13th. But it's only a $4,000 difference.
Okay. My second question, Ed, is your proposal is adding just 3 people, 1 operator, and 2 craftsmen? Is that the way you see it?
I'm sorry.
The addition of a total of 3 heads?
There'll be 3 full-time employees and 1 part-time employee.
Total.
And I won't need him for the whole year. It'll just be sporadic during the summer.
So they're new hires? They would be new hires, that's all I know.
Is there,
Sorry, would they be new hires?
they
Is
would
that
be new
what- okay.
hires, absolutely. Now, if there's, we'll advertise in-house first, as we always done.
Okay.
And those people, I mean, everybody in-house would be able to apply for it, and we'll determine that at the time whether or not we feel their qualifications match exactly what we need. And if they don't, then we'll also advertise outside to get those type people. Because, I mean, it would be a side move for most people there because of our, our operators or anything, because pay is going to be identical to what we're currently making.
I just,
Hey, would this be a standalone department that you would create?
That is correct. It would be a standalone department that would be under engineering.
Through engineer, okay.
That's correct.
And it would-
Overseen by,
It would be funded out of capital money.
yes.
Would be no general fund, refuse, sewer fees, it would all be out of capital.
excuse me, can I?
I'm sorry.
Just one more. You did something like this, not a new department or a new group. You did work before for us and that we were going to get outside folks to do, if I remember correctly. You did some things in the building.
Oh, yes.
And it
we-
worked
we-
well.
we-
And it
Yes,
worked
absolutely.
well.
We set up a,
A couple years ago,
his
you were
name's
trying
Craig.
to save us.
Yes.
It worked really well.
We started another program where we started doing all the work in the township in-house.
Mm-hmm.
And that has worked tremendously for us. We've been able to accomplish a lot with the same amount of money that we were spending in the past to do projects.
My microphones, could you fix this microphone?
Can you, hey, can you go back to the tally sheet? Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Ed, we need help with this microphone. Can you fix this?
Fix it tomorrow.
New capital expenditure right there. So Ed, you said it's you have 3 full-time and 1 part-time?
That's correct.
And where's the part-time employees' costs in this whole thing?
It's right there.
It's not on the printed thing, it's on
Yeah,
the, only on the
that's-
screen.
Sorry. That's what I
It's not in that one. That's
agree.
something I added in afterwards. When I started recalculating everything out and seeing exactly, like I said, I'm trying to get everything to max that it's going to cost us.
Right.
10,000, I'm probably not going to need for a part-timer just for the summer, but I'd rather have that money in here and talk about it now than to go back later and somebody review everything that we're doing and come back and say, like, you never said you were going to spend this kind of money.
So, talk to me about how we're going to track the time on the employees and what they're working on, and try to evaluate how efficient they're being and compared to other work that we've done with subcontractors or contracting the work out. And then also, is your anticipation that this work is going to occur 12 months out of the year?
I anticipate it will. The only time you may not have it is maybe during January for a little while. The same way with a regular contractor. If the weather gets so brutal that you can't work, heavy snows, ice, whatever it may be, we may have to shut down for a little bit in January.
So how is that funding? Are we carrying those employees through that period of time, or are they laid
You'll
off?
be carrying those employees, and it will be coming out of the the money that we have allotted here.
So is that calculated in here? That you're
It's
not
not
working,
calculated here, but it's calculated long-term
you're working
on the
off of,
$1.2 million. I'm sorry.
you're not working off of 12 months, you're working off of 10 or 11 months?
That's correct.
No, it's
12 months.
12-month cost.
Yeah, but if
I'm
they're
not-
not working, then where's the funding going? Where's the residual amount going?
Because the money is still coming out of the funds that we anticipated using to do the projects. Those projects was pushed back a little bit, but the money's still there. And what I'm saying is, we have the 825 and the $600,000 set out for an entire year. So I broke this down to 4 because it's probably going to end up being a 3 separate projects. Instead of doing 3 that we were looking at, it'll end up being 4. The one that engineering is currently doing now, the one I'm proposing here for 825, there'll be another one for 600, and then the leftover money will be the final part of it.
But you're paying these guys for 12 months, except for the
Correct.
part-time person.
Correct.
But there's a potential that they're not gonna work for 12 months on this program.
No, potential's there to work 12 months because we have other projects that we could be doing that are not associated, that we don't necessarily have to do
But
concrete
how's
work.
that money being funded?
Pardon me?
How's
Mr.
that
Klein.
money being funded?
That money's already in the budget already.
Let me help him out. Look, you have to look at this, and I hear where you're going with your questions. It is going to be a 12-month period. The whole idea is we're going to have to cost it out to wherever they work, just like you would any other job. So every job that they're working, if they're not working a job, you know, in the construction world, especially site construction, that any time, you might have snow days, you might have rain days, you might have other days, that if they have to go work something else, we're going to have their full rates, including overhead rates, that will get charged off to some other cost. So
But how is that being budgeted?
how is it being budgeted?
Yeah, so.
It's going to
let's say
be-
you have-
they're going to be
Let's say you have a
working-
series of days where it rains, or you have, what was it, a couple winters ago where we had ice storms for, weeks on end, and it was, you couldn't touch the ground. So you have these guys, or women, whatever they are, on the payroll, and
Mm-hmm.
they're not working for what they're budgeted for. So how is that money being allocated out?
I think it was Ed's intention all along that they would have 12 months' work doing something capital, correct?
That's correct.
That they would not be doing other things, that there are capital projects that they're going to be doing. I don't anticipate that, if there's a snowstorm and they can't get out there and work those days, can he work them somewhere else? Well, that's going to hit probably overtime or snow, so they might have to get costed out against that. I don't know. This is a private sector approach to a public sector function, so I'm not
Right,
quite sure.
I got all that. I'm not against the idea, I just want to understand the numbers.
All right, let me,
If you're paying them for 12 months, and they're only potentially working 10, 11, 10 and a half months, whatever it may be, you have a month and a half of paid salaries and benefits that needs to be allocated somewhere.
I don't see it being a month and a half.
Well, whatever, say it's 3 weeks. I mean, I don't know what it's gonna be.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think anybody here understands how long it could be. I mean, you have rain days during the week, during the summer, so, it could be whatever. How is that money being handled? Is that, so, as you're allocating, you're coming up with this $317,000 for the year, and you're costing it down to 4 months. My question is, should that be bumped up because they're only being allocated for a shorter period of time?
so,
I think maybe I understand. You're saying that we're saying they're not going to work a whole 12 months. They're still going to work a whole 12 months. They could get pulled over to highway to help with snow and ice removal. So if they did that, we could charge them to the snow and ice removal budget, which is funded by the highway aid. If they're not, everything would be charged to the capital budget, which we're showing here. And even if they were spent out 100% of their time to the capital budget and they didn't work it, we're still saving half the budget of what we would have spent ABC Company to do the same work. So it's sitting down with everyone, we feel it's a win-win situation for the township and getting us to spend more money on more projects that we all know are out there for everyone that asks engineering and Ed to do these jobs. Hey, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? And we only have $3 million. So by doing this 4 projects, Ed's going to do in 50% of the cost. So if he does it for the other, I don't know, 10 or whatever's on our list here, that's going to be a win-win situation for all of us. So the goal for this was to charge 100% to the bond or loan money, capital. But if they worked over snow and ice, we could charge them the snow and ice, and that is highway aid. So that could happen.
Right, and I got all of that, but I still don't understand if they're not working on capital, which is going to happen. I mean, you're not going to use them 12 months out of the year. It just doesn't happen in site construction. So what happens, and you're saying it gets charged out to other things, but you have to have that budgeted. You already have it budgeted that we're going to plow the streets, we're going to do whatever in highway aid fund, off of the highway aid fund, all that stuff's already budgeted. So now this is throwing them into that, this is additional on top of that. So now there's a cost involved in there.
Not necessarily.
There's not people earmarked in the highway aid budget for salaries. Okay, the highway aid budget in snow and ice control is just set up in labor and overtime. So, but it doesn't, it's not specific to the highway department or public works, or Parks and Rec or wastewater, who will all come out and help us. So they'll get paid out of the highway aid fund above and beyond what the normal budget is for everybody in their departments. So we got that part of it covered. And I can go almost 12 months. I'd probably do the entire 12 months because I got other projects on top of these projects that, in other words, I've got grants that we have out there that are in-kind service grants. These people would work on those whenever we stop working on any of the capital projects. We would jump right into that part of it, the grant part of it, where we're doing in-kind services as a match for that work we're going to be doing. So and most of that work I can do year-round, whether it be installing poles or anything similar to it. It doesn't matter if it's raining. It doesn't matter if it's got a light snow. The only time I can't work is in a major ice storm or a major snowstorm. And at that point in time, they would go into highway aid.
I'm not sure that I'm going to get my answer or that it's fully understood, but let me just say, I'm interested in the project. I'm interested in the program. I think clearly if the savings truly are what the savings are, it's a no-brainer. I do have concerns about accountability on these projects because the contractors that we hire they have to work within a schedule, they have to work within a certain number, that's what they have to do. Sometimes if you bring stuff in-house, and I know how Ed, how you operate, so I'm less concerned about it. However, you just, over time, complacency sometimes, gets into the whole situation, and we start throwing projects at them just to keep them busy. We start picking up stuff in our stormwater list that may be way down the list just because we have guys to do them. Are they necessarily something that should be done? That's my concern, is just we have the people sitting around, not sitting around, we have the people in staff, and we're going to find ways to use them. And finding ways to use them is not necessarily what we should be doing. That's my concern.
But that's not the purpose of that. Hopefully that's not going to end up happening. Timmy runs the projects that are out there right now. He sets everybody's heels to the grinder, okay? He knows what his deadlines are. He tells them what their deadlines are. He's also going to be running these projects. And he knows what the deadlines are. He knows what's got to happen. He knows what has to happen, what has to get done, and how it has to get done. He knows how many projects he has to get done in a year. Just like he does now, I don't anticipate anything changing other than instead of going to a contractor and telling him to do it, he's going to be telling our guys the same thing he's telling the contractor. I'm hoping that the lead operator is going to be the guy that's going to end up running the jobs on the job, with Timmy overseeing everything, and with Timmy making sure that everything gets done correctly the way it should be done. So from my standpoint, I feel very confident, and I've got people behind me, Angelo, one of them, and other people that are going to be moving up that I have extreme confidence in to make sure that this thing goes right.
The last comment I make is that just, before we get to a final budget, I'd like to have an understanding of how we're gonna track the projects and track
Track
the
the projects, we'll do the same thing as we're doing now.
years, so that the board can understand how the operation is progressing and whether it truly is working the way we're expecting it to, and it's also working on projects that are vital to the township and not just fill-in work.
I agree with you. We'll do the same thing as we currently do on projects. We do work orders. We track the cost associated with each and everything we do. And if you want to report, I'll make sure the report goes to the board at intervals as we're going through the projects. Now, when you say you don't want work being made, I have no intention to make, I don't think there's any intention here to make any
I don't think
extra
there's
work.
any intention either.
But there is work out there that's going to end up need to be done by someone or somewhere along the way. And I feel this is an ideal scenario to be able to jump on that stuff and take care of that. Like I said, we have grants coming up, and it's in-kind services. As you know, we're doing 20 miles of overlay a year now at the rate we're going. So for us to find time in between to go do some of this in-kind services is going to be a little challenge to us. This would take a lot of that challenge off of us, which is another reason why I started looking at this. Because, I mean, there's a tremendous savings right across the board, whether it be in the grant end of it, with in-kind services, so it doesn't cost fund balance money or whatever money we will use to make these grants happen, improvements to infrastructure, wherever it may be. And we also have this portion of it, which I think will work out very well for us.
Well, my point to that is we have a list that the engineering department, and I think you've been a part of it, goes through and rates these projects, especially stormwater management projects.
Correct.
And we try to work off of the list of the highest priorities. My concern is we get down into those projects that are rated 6 or 7 that are really just on there because somebody asked a commissioner to ask the engineering department about it, but are really not something that the township should be necessarily getting involved in or is not critical, and then we should start picking those because we have guys that need something to do. And I know
agree.
that's not your intention, but that's my concern.
I agree with you, but it's actually up to the board to make the decision as what projects get done. I don't think any project gets done that doesn't come through the board as far as capital goes. So any projects the extra projects that'll be associated with the extra money that is saved on this proposal, I'm assuming that it would all end up coming to the board.
I understand what you're saying. I think you also know that my background is in where I spend a lot of time. So I do understand there's going to have to be cost accounting, there's going to have to be cost distribution, we're going to have real costs, we're going to have to be able to account for them. When I talk about goals, objectives, strategies, how we're going to do things going forward, the kind of analysis that we went through with personnel and making the decisions we've made to put people in the right place, not only with Ed, but the people he has coming up behind him. There's a very strong administrative management team in place. I feel very confident between Ed, the team that he's training right now, finance and the people that they have, and the ability to actually drill down on getting costs that will be able to track costs. And I think that there's every intention to work everybody 12 months out of the year in some way and cost them out where they can. But that's one of the things that he said early on, is if we find that this program isn't working, the benefit that we have through the attrition that we talked about and what Ed's talked about, because it's one of the things we talked about. What happens if this doesn't work? Well, there's 2 and 3 different positions that are going to be coming open in Public Works that if this thing isn't saving the money, it seems to be, it's not as cost effective as it's meant to be, then those people can get shifted into other roles. So there's a fail-safe there.
Yeah, I mean, if you're saving 50%, I'd actually rather you structure the whole value of all this, figuring that they're only working 10 months, but you're still paying them for 12 months. Divide the thing out of the total in the 10 months, and then don't save as much, but at least you've allocated. Anything else we get out of them is bonus.
Is gravy. I
So I
understand.
mean, that's
I mean, I could change the
it's not
event-
like we're skimming
Right.
right on the margins here. I mean, you're saving 50%. So I would rather you see you figure that they're only working 10 months, but you're paying them for 12 months, and just factor in that cost over the 12-month period of time.
And I can do that if that's what you desire to do. I mean, it's not,
Then you don't have to
it's
worry
not
about
hard
it.
to do.
So
It's
anything you get is
it's
gravy.
simple, it's just changing numbers, and, you know, I can do that without a problem.
Thank you.
I have some other commissioners
Yeah.
that have questions. I'll start with Commissioner Zabon, and Commissioner Myers, and then Commissioner Spiegelman.
Ed, first of all, I want to commend you for your hard work in putting this program together. I think it's a no-brainer. I know for years now, we've been moving towards getting our own in-house forces to do this work. I think we'll have more control over the work that we're doing versus a contractor. I just think it's a no-brainer. And it'll work. There's plenty of work. You know, calling Public Works, calling Engineering Department, getting things done. Trust me, there'll be a lot of work out there. So I commend you for that.
Commissioner Myers.
Thank you. Ed, with these folks talking about this, you know, downtime, weather, possible downtime, would these folks be able to help with inside work? Because we have a really aging infrastructure with our buildings alone, and although I haven't gone through each individual capital project for the inside projects, it would certainly seem like there's plenty of indoor work that could be done. Some of your folks are already doing that. This room is an example of that. Would that be possible to take up some of the
That would
slack?
be possible if I restructured the proposal, as the Commissioner Klein was stated, then I would be able to do something like that.
But that's always out there. That
That's always out there.
possibility is always out
Yes,
there.
but I don't, yeah, that is out there. I don't anticipate that much happening, but it is out there. I have another crew, if you want to call it, that handles everything on the inside now, and there's very little that they can't do. But if we get in a situation that for whatever reason, that something happens and I can't use them on a project, yeah, we will have something for them to do at that point in time for whatever that short period of time is that I can't work on the outside.
I would like to say that I was in favor of this the first time it was proposed a while ago, and obviously I'm still very much in favor of it. And like Commissioner Zabon said, it is a no-brainer, and it would be a real asset to this township.
And I agree. And at the time back then, I backed away because I wasn't convinced that that would work, given the scenario that we had at that point in time. Given the scenario we're in right now, with the grants that we have out there, all the in-kind service work that's going to be coming up to take care of all these grants, the money that's available out there now is amazing, and we're fools as people that are in charge of the finances here did not grab this kind of money and fix the infrastructure that, as you said, is deteriorating in a hurry here. There's a lot of work that has to happen out there, especially with intersections and traffic signals, and just to keep up, because a traffic signal after any more 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and they're antiquated. So there's a lot of work that has to happen out there. This will allow us to continue moving forward with the grants that are out there and grabbing money when it's available.
Commissioner Spiegelman.
Thank you, President Luker. Ed, I don't want to drown you in praise or make you blush, but this is an awesome idea. I love it. I'm a big fan. Something to put out there just to think about for the future. You know, obviously we have a significant infrastructure, particularly when it comes to roads, that is PennDOT owned. And when work has to be done on those, I know that that has to be bid out to only a list of PennDOT approved contractors. I'm wondering, hypothetically, maybe this is possible, maybe it's not, if everything works out with this in-house crew, if they could somehow get themselves, be certified to do certain kinds of PennDOT work and be an option for work that needs to be done on PennDOT roads instead of automatically having to bid that out, that might expand, even further what they're capable of doing and the money they're capable of saving us and the flexibility to do some of that PennDOT work, which is always a little more complicated. That's just out there. That's not even a question, it's just a...
I don't have that answer, but I know we have in the past had agreements with PennDOT to do some work for them. I don't know, that may be a viable option that I'll take a look at, and we will come up with it with a similar like we did in the past, but I will take a look at it.
Thanks, and thanks again. This is, as I said, big fan.
Commissioner Hecker.
Thank you. As Director of the Public Works Committee, I had the opportunity to preview this with Ed and Rich a few weeks ago, and I think it's a worthy experiment. You know, experiments either fail or they succeed, and when experiments fail, you learn from them and you try the experiment again a little bit differently. I do think we need to be fully transparent about how we're structuring this so that we can manage and understand the true cost savings. The benefit and the attractiveness here is that we already have these projects budgeted, so we know what we've budgeted for outside contracting services, and you can compare and contrast against that. As we move forward, it would be good to keep that in mind, even though we won't be going through that similar budget exercise, but I'd really like to see the savings from this get plowed back into priority projects. I mean, to Commissioner Klein's point, not everything on this $21 million list is the highest of priority, but there are many that are, and I would like to see these savings be plowed back into those projects on behalf of the residents. Thank you.
And to just go back on Commissioner Klein's on tracking, we're going to track it similar to what we do in the overlay program. We track everything that goes along with the overlay program, which is all the manpower, all the benefits for the employees, the materials, the length, width. We have everything covered on every street and what we spend on every street. We know what our costs are associated with. I'll give an example. We bid on some of the aqua work, a lot of the aqua work, now all of it actually. And so we know exactly what our costs are associated with what our bid is. And we make sure that we still stay way below that. We watch our costs. Angela watches our costs. I don't watch it at all. But and Angela and Eileen and Marlene and everybody else in the office and Lisa, we keep a good track. Angela keeps a good track, and he makes sure we're all up to date on everything that's going on. So we know what the costs are associated with it. I know how much is left over after we're all done, and the profit margin that we made out of it, which is what we're working on right now. There is a profit associated with it, and that profit is going to go back into our programs again. So we'll be doing the same tracking as we do in that thing, in that vein of the overlay program. So it'll be available to everybody, anybody that wants it at any point in time.
One other thing I'd like to add. I understand your questions and I understand your rationale. I think there's another component that's not in this room this evening that gives me great confidence, setting aside Ed and Angelo and the team that he's building. Tim Clark. Tim Clark came from that world. He understands it. He's the project manager. He's going to be the person who's going to be watching over this along with Ed in his new part-time role. But I think having Tim gives me a great comfort level because I know who he worked for, I know what he did, I know what he does, and that gives me a higher level of comfort.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Ed.
Since this is probably my last proposal, what happened with this board, so if you want to get your cameras out and take a picture.
Photo ops after.
Ed, before you walk away, by the way, please share that with me so I can share that with the commissioners since you updated that today. The projects that you see on the memo from Mike Powers to me today, October 18th, you'll notice in the 2017 Capital Improvements Phase 2 on this memo form, the ones that are boxed and blocked, those are the 4 projects that are earmarked for work to be done by this team if in fact it goes forward. So they're also, that's the $825,000 he's referring to in his total cost.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Richard? About a month or so ago, you sent out a list to all the commissioners asking us to prioritize the projects.
That's correct.
Did you ever get a response that could be disseminated in some form or fashion?
I'd rather stay away from the response or responses that we did not get. Let's just say that the response to the survey was not what we had hoped it would be. So we'll have to address the goals and objectives going forward. So yeah, that was, I guess, end of July, early August.
My point was there any correlation between that response and what you just said Mike Powers prioritized the projects with?
Candidly, no, because the responses that we got on the projects were not represented here.
Any other questions? Did you want to continue then?
We were going to go into capital a little bit further, and of course, if there's any questions that you had from what you've had to see, yeah,
Would you,
throughout the whole
Would you
general
prefer
fund
questions
and all
on
the
that?
line items, all the directors are here to answer any questions you might have. Well, if we could finish through capital,
do you want to do capital first
Please.
before line item? Okay, yep.
Oh, actually, before we go on to capital, we did some reorganization, or you did some reorganization. Can you go through how that's represented in the budget for 2018?
sure. You're going to see dispersed throughout the whole, all of the line items. I think a conservative estimate in cost savings as a result of the reorganization that's in your narrative is somewhere in the neighborhood of $220,000 in savings as a result of it. I think that number is actually understated. I could tell you, in fact, that the savings would be greater if not for a lot of the PTO buyouts that we have to do for those folks who are in drop and retiring. So there's a lot of accumulated time that reduce the savings in year one. But the two things you'll see really are the engineering and code, and again, the assistant fire marshal. Showed you a chart that projected out, goes back to 2015. So they were comparing apples to apples and not apples to pineapples. I showed you 15 versus 19 just by combining the engineering and code departments in the way that we did and bringing in, going to a full-time township engineer. You already went through the exercise of the costs if we outsourced engineering, and when I proposed this merger.
Page 4 of their book.
It is page 4? Thank you.
Page 4 of your book, that's what Manager Manfredi is explaining to you.
Is on the engineering and code savings, and that was, if you look forward 1 year, when you take into account most of it's $100,000 just for that one merger. I think it's important to note too that, with the promotion of the assistant fire marshal into the fire marshal position, which, for those watching, I guess you're getting a preview of what's coming, who's going to be becoming the fire marshal when Mr. Clark retires. But by utilizing fire inspectors and not utilizing the assistant fire marshal, there's another significant savings. Moving some of the people we moved in administrative management roles is also saving some money, quite a bit actually, if we had to bring people in from the outside. But more importantly, the people that were moved are adept at why they were moved to where they're moved. I mean, frankly, in Public Works, without the team that's being built there, I think it's worth every penny we're paying. And I think it also allowed us to save additional dollars elsewhere with those two positions.
So you think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 220?
Oh, it's a minimum of $220,000, a minimum.
That's including the PTO that you're paying out?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, it's including reducing the savings by the PTO out.
Right. Thank you.
Believe me, we had some internal debates about that number.
Couple hours.
Any other questions? I had one. I think this would be directed to Department Head George Wrigley. Under capital funds, sewer operations, fiscal year 2017, we were in at 470,000, and there's a big drop from 2018 to 35,000. What could that be contributed to?
George?
George? Under capital funds, sewer operations?
Generally, over the last 4 years, almost 4 years since I was hired, we put a lot of capital projects in the first 3 years. We have quite a few projects that we still have to complete, so I wasn't going to add any more to it until we finish the projects that were basically ongoing right now. So that one line item, it's actually two line items, is to add a piece of equipment as a backup for a piece of equipment that we already have, that we just added. And the other $20,000 is for this total phosphorus TMDL pilot study that we're in the middle of now. I wanted to keep putting a little bit of money into that because we really don't frankly know what's going to be coming out of that, so.
So that accounts for the variance of.
That's the big drop.
45,000 from
Yeah,
last
that's
year
the
to
big
this year.
drop. We have enough work ongoing right now that we're doing internally. It's going to keep us going for probably this year and probably into next year too, so.
Let me ask you a question. Based on the presentation you just gave, Ed, could any of that manpower be used for any projects in the, in George's department? Just out of curiosity.
I'm not sure what projects he has, I'd have to take a look at them before I can answer that question.
I'm wondering if their skill set would be something that could be transferred to that department.
Most of what we're doing is equipment, electronics, that kind of a thing. We don't really have any excavation type projects. I mean, we just did a project to renovate one of our tanks, and we just rented out a piece of equipment similar to what Ed did, but we only used it for a week, and that's all we need. So it's very, very minimal excavation that we would use for any of our projects. Our projects are treatment plant equipment type projects, really, most of it.
Okay, just curiosity. Okay.
Sure.
Commissioner Gillespie.
Thank you. George, so if it drops that much, so next year, I mean, it just seems that, I remember back a few years ago, we talked about so many big projects needed to be done over at the sewer treatment plant, needing really big equipment. I don't know whether you folks remember that on the board here. And I'm just wondering, with being this low this year, what's coming next year? I mean,
We have a five-year plan in the capital
Okay.
budget. I think the one big project that we talked about previously was the one digester, $1.2 million. And I don't know what Mr. Lieber's plans were for that. I mean, he told me generally what it was, and I can't see doing that major. That's the one major project that we had in the capital budget before. Part of that big sum of money is probably going to be used. We're trying to change the operation to get it for what we call our biosolids that we take out now to landfill, or actually land application. We want to try to get it to what we call Class A quality, so we can actually sell the product. Instead of having an expense, it'll go to a positive revenue side. Part of that $1.2 million may go to renovating systems to make that possible. But I can't imagine it ever be that much money.
okay.
That's a lot. I can't see it ever being needed for that kind of work, so. My philosophy is probably a little bit different than what Mr. Lieber's was. I come from more of an engineering background, and I'm very, very tight on not spending any money any more than you absolutely have
Oh,
to.
I know how engineers are. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Any questions, Mr. Ridley? Commissioner Sanchez?
If I could just follow up on that as it relates to one of my other questions, but, and this may be for the both of you, Manager Manfredi and George. On page 5 of the actual budget book and the budget message, near the top, first paragraph, about middle of the paragraph there, or first paragraph at the top of the page, it says fiscal year 2018 capital fund expenditures are 2.4 million and change versus 3.473, a reduction of 1,042,000. Table 1 below shows the expenditure for each fund, and then there's a sentence, the decrease in the capital fund is primarily due to a reduction in capital outlays for sewer operations and the capital permanent improvement funds. Is that, I was just confused by that slightly, but is that what you were just describing,
Yes.
George? Like less, we're
Yes.
spending less on that capital, and that's
That's correct.
in
That's-
context of
That's
just,
the big job right there.
you left some projects in, but it's just a,
We have quite a few projects in the works right now, so. We have enough to keep us busy all this year, probably in the next year with what we're
Gotcha.
trying to do, so. No use adding any more work to it at this point until we really know what's.
but you could sort of see that,
Yeah.
I guess, levels out in your detail, it bumps back up in the,
19 and 20.
we're bumping back up in 2019, but I guess it would bump back, or remain a little consistent in 2020 in your,
Now, remember, the biggest component of the capital projecting out for the next 3 or 4 years is the Interceptor project that Cheltenham Township's working on right now. We are a component or a contributor to the cost of that project, 36%, and that's over $3 million in expenses that we're gonna have to incur for that project. So some of the big numbers you may see in 2019, 2020, and 2021 show those large numbers coming back in when we have to make our contributions to that project.
okay.
So, not to say that we're not spending money, but there is this other big, very big project out there that we have to pay our share of that project, so.
Understood. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Any other questions of Mr. Wiggly? Thank you, George.
Okay.
Mr. Manfredi, are there any other points for presentation from either you or Kevin?
We did want to touch a little bit further on the capital, because that's really a driver in these costs.
Handout does break it out. There's 3 slides. Okay. Part of the fund balance policy we approved back in 2015 helps out fund the permanent improvement fund. So what I wanted to lay out was just to show you that at the end of 2016, there was $5.9 million in that fund, but of that, $3 million was already allocated for expenses. 17 projects, 16 projects, as long as Georgia said, some projects take 2-3 years to get done, so that's that money. Then the revenue for 17 is about $944,000, and then the transfer from the 2016 surplus is $2.4 million. So that leaves us with $6.2 million to start 18, if you would say. So this just lays out the funding of how we will fund it. For people that were here before, we used to have a transfer from the general fund of about $500,000, $750,000. With the new fund balance policy, the money's sitting in the permanent improvement fund balance. So we're going to use $1.2 million of the permanent improvement fund balance, transfer from fire, which is $85,000 to help fund some of their projects they're doing, because that helps the whole township. The 2007 lieu of money. So the lieu of money we count and collect in 17 uses for 18, and that's where they've done it in all previous past years. It's $505,000. And then the projects that are out there, we go back to the departments and say, hey, what projects are done? What projects are you over with? We can get rid of the money, put it back into the fund, and use for other projects. That's about $18,000 right now. I'll be hounding along with Jeanette, all departments for the next 2 months to turn back more money. So we'll get that up a little bit more. The next slide is what we're recommending to be approved for the 2018 capital project. Now, this just shows the total. You have a handout behind the total of what everybody put in for and what we're recommending for approval. When we put the book together, that was 2.3 million, I think. It's at 1.867 million with sitting down with some departments and going over some things. There were some things that could be funded with the capital loan money. That's why we did that whole spreadsheet showing the $3 million spent out. So by doing that, we were able to fund every project that every department put in for in capital for 2018. And that's, in my view, a great thing, because in the years I've been here, and probably for the commissioners who've been here, we've never been able to do that. There's projects that always get pushed off to next year, the next year, and so this is a great proposed capital budget that we put together.
A couple of highlights, and we'll go through it, obviously, and answer any. There's a few things that frankly, I requested be put in here, and one of them, it's under administration because it's a municipal building. But as you can see, one of the things I've heard from the day I arrived here is parking is a problem. So in trying to look at where the real problem is, rather than fixing the symptoms to really fix the problem, it became clear to me that what's missing is a secure lot for our police officers. So in the administration, it says Security Gate Township Building. Really, it's more about developing a secure lot that is access only by swipe access, and Ed's, as in everything else, working very closely as to why that number is so low. So the goal with that is to literally change how traffic flows into the police parking area, secure it with automatic gates, so off-duty as well as on-duty can park there and be safe, not have to worry about parking somewhere in the parking lot, walking in and being surprised. So that's one aspect. I also wanted to point out that, you know, $295,000 for capital projects in administration sounds like a lot of money. What are we looking for there? $200,000 is grant support. So throughout the course of the year, when various grants come up that we want to apply for, that's a reserve in the capital fund for having matching dollars for those grants. Tracer is something that was started prior to my arrival. I guess it was one of those things that was on the wait for the manager to get here. But that system is going to really be a work order system. It'll also function as what I would characterize as a constituent service system, so that we can start tracking all the times that you have people who reach out to you who need assistance. It can get distributed and work and tracked, and you can know how many times that you helped a constituent or a resident in your areas. The website update and app is really to make the website a little bit more user-friendly and more interactive, so we can start doing more things across all platforms. You know, for example, I was talking with Dave Schramm and some of the other fire guys who went on some trainings. We'd like to be able to integrate our websites together so we can put, you know, all of the training that they do. They just came back from Texas and they have all kinds of photos. We're going to be putting videos up. I'd like to eventually get to a point where this other item, it says boardroom sound system. That's more than just the sound system. That is literally reconfiguring our operations, our production in this room, with monitors on the side, the ability to actually take these cameras and produce videos and video clips. We could have firefighters. You could have someone from the library come in and they could be promoted. We could have the police department give PSAs. So that $86,000 takes into account $80,000 that we currently have in grant money. So it's probably a $200,000 project, and the hope is that we can get that $86,000 down even more by renegotiating our Verizon lease, so maybe we can get a grant from them. So 86 would be a max, but that wouldn't be just a sound system. I wanted to make clear that that's a complete production in this room as to how you do business, what goes up on the walls. It integrates so that when whatever's being seen on those screens goes right to people at home. It's not a camera taking a picture and being reproduced. It's a very higher end technology, and frankly, I'll be pushing to get HD technology as well. And of course, the app is very simple. You know, everybody knows what apps are. You can literally develop an app anywhere from $7,000 to $10,000 that people can download, and they can go right online and see public information. They can report a concern. They can get something to the police. And of course, the management team would develop that. So those are a few things. And I know that there's one commissioner in particular who's been working with Andy Oles on trying to increase right down everything to about $10,000. We may have to look at adding that isn't in here, that I expect discussion to come up later. But for the most part, those were the critical things that I thought that we talked about, and there's a lot of things in here that I'm sure you're going to have questions about that I wanted to touch on, and I just wanted to point out. So, anything you wanted to talk? Do you want to talk about the software update at all, or no? You good? Finance update.
No, one of the things in information technologies is a finance update, and that's to upgrade our finance software. Our software that we do our payroll, accounts payable, budget is over 18 years old. So I've been putting money away every year in capital to do this. This I think is the third of the 4 years that I plan on doing this, and start looking at software next year with my staff and moving forward with that. So that's what the finance update is for finance software.
Thank you. Commissioner Ralston, you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to address what Rich had mentioned as to an addition that we could see in a next draft of this. I've been working with Andy, who publicly deserves some thanks. We had a lot of recent an influx of concerns at Alverthorpe, and we've been working on various things, including addressing the entrance to the park, some safety things there. But we spoke earlier today, and it looks like, you know, between $10,000 and $15,000 more is needed to address an equipment addition in the park. So that's what Rich was referring to. So I just wanted to clarify that. And again, I thank Rich and Andy and very much so Ben for working with me on those upgrades at the park.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, back to you, Rich.
Two other things I want to draw your attention to, and I was just queuing up Mr. Schramm. Dave, if you would, please. Throughout my discussions with some of the chiefs and Dave and Ken and John Rohr, the two items on here, the air truck and a radio replacement project, I just thought were noteworthy.
The Abington Township Fire Department runs an air truck. This is the truck that takes air out of the atmosphere, purifies it, and puts it in the cylinders. They call them SCBA, self-contained breathing apparatus, that the firefighters wear on their backs when they go into hazardous environments. The truck has serviced us well for 24 years, thanks to the Vehicle Maintenance Department, the fire store, and me. We have the air that the truck produces certified on a quarterly basis, and each quarter the truck and the compressor continues to produce air that is of high quality and certified, so that firefighters that breathe it know that the truck is doing what it needs to be done. But as I said, it's 23, 24 years old, and we want to start thinking about replacing it. We feel that a 30-year life cycle, there would still be some perhaps trade-in value to it at that time. Setting aside $100,000 a year should enable us to do this. You know, you don't want to wait till something breaks or continues to work or no longer produces certifiable air to tackle this project. So that's why we've made this capital budget request.
Dave, just for commissioners, how much would the cost be to replace the air truck?
We've estimated, and it's just an estimate at this time, when we purchased the air truck back in 1993, it was roughly the cost of a fire engine, of a pumper. So today, or 5 years from now, the estimated cost of a pumper would be in the $800,000 range. If and when the truck replacement project gets funded and gets on the books and we start moving forward with this, we would have all the support data necessary to give you exact numbers. But this is a new program proposal, and
does that have potential offsets from any kind of grants, do you think of?
not that I'm aware of, no. The FEMA, and I'm somewhat familiar with FEMA grants, does not fund air trucks.
Okay, any other questions?
Those were some of the projects that I wanted to highlight, but obviously you have the list in front of you. If there's anything on that list that you have any questions about, through any department, they are all here to answer those questions.
I have a few, if now's the right time. It's not specifically for the fire department, so it's not.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's okay, if now's the appropriate time, I will try to be brief, just because there's a few, and I know the hour's getting late, but maybe that will save us from having the next optional meetings, if we can get through it. So without further ado, and the first one is just a comment. I wanted to commend the police department on, within their objectives, all of which are very important. A couple jumped off the page at me because it was very, what I would refer to as forward-thinking. One of them being work to make sure that all members of our community, including minority members, have confidence and trust in the Abington Township Police Department. Another one, along the same lines, maintain an active minority recruitment program and work to make our department reflective of the community we serve in all ways, including gender, race, and ethnicity. And the final one, make sure that our department is as prepared in both training and equipment to meet the opioid epidemic. Excuse me. So I just thought, while all of these were incredibly important, those three kind of jumped out at me as very timely and sensitive to what's going on in the environment, the community, the environment, and nationally. And then to a real question, page 82 in the, this is in the administration department detail. Just not sure if this is picked up somewhere. It's account 5020. There's a reduction in the minutes secretary from like 50,000 to 37,000. Does that relate to the work Liz does? I mean, is that something?
That is not a cut. We were paying the minutes secretary out of payroll. We are now paying the minutes secretary out of contracted services. So if you want and looked at contracted services, which is 2 pages, on the page 84, you'd see the 14,350 added to that. So that went from 17,000 up to 31,000. So it was just moving the way we were paying the minutes secretary.
And I had it circled in the opposite direction on 5305, so great, thank you. And this may, hopefully is along the same lines or something, but on that same page 84 you just referenced, under general expenses, I see the Shade Tree Commission, it went from 6,000 to 0, is that?
That was moved over to Parks and Rec.
Excellent.
So it'll be where it should be. So we did some things, we haven't done all, but.
These are softballs, and I would have asked them earlier, but I was looking at this as we came to the meeting. On into the police section, page 112, and I think I know the answer to this, or maybe, but there was a $35,000 allocation in 2017 for this is overtime, but I think it was, I'm sorry, it's contracted services funded to pay for sergeants and lieutenants' promotional processes. Are we just done with that in the short term, or is that?
Correct, because of the test being done. When we knew it was going to happen this year, we budgeted. A lot of previous years, we took it out of contingency during the year, but since we knew it was going to happen, we budgeted last year. They're not going to need to do a test next year because the test is good for a year from the date of certification.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then page 159, just a question on a note at the bottom, but it relates to 2015. This is on SRO 2. Again, page 159. It says 2015 program revenues, 100,985. Is that?
Correct. It should have 16 and 17, so it's not on there, but I will update it.
What is, I mean, how did they?
The SRO is the school resource officer reimbursed by the school district. They reimburse us 75% of the wages and benefits for that officer.
Gotcha. All right.
16 and 17 was the same dollar amount, 109.85. I know that just from working with it.
Thank you.
That's 75%?
Correct.
And then this is back in capital. It's actually in a couple places, but where I'm looking is 365. Just curious what there's a township match, but there's an Avalthorpe Park grant listed. Is that something you could explain a little bit, or if Andy's around?
When Mr. Powers put this together for Mr. Manfredi and myself, he put these on here so that we didn't forget that we had a match for these grants that had already been approved. I obviously took the negatives off when we were approving it, because I don't need to approve negatives, but the money is already, for one is the Army Corps of Engineers. That's part of the loan money we borrowed in 17. That matches in there. And then the other grant matches in another section already budgeted, so there's no reason to budget again. They left it there so I would have it for my records.
What was that for specifically?
Going Greener grant
Going Greener.
is one grant that, I don't have the explanation of that, but I could get that for,
Mike can answer it. Mr. Powers.
I'm looking at it here.
It rings a bell, but it's a faint, distant bell, so.
make it Township Greener.
Grover Greener grant is for Rochester Park and over at Willow Hill. Avalthorpe is a grant for, and this all applies to our MS4 program. It's all tied into our MS4 program to do bioretention basins and stuff in Avalthorpe Park to cut down on the pollution into the pond and cut down the sediment that's running down into the pond. So that's what all these grants are for. The reason I put them down there is I didn't want them forgotten when I'm going, so that you remembered there are matches for them and that they are allocated for. So I kind of wanted to list all this stuff so that it was all there in front of you, so you had it for the future.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
And I think this is the last one. I never understand this dynamic, but 447, there's an item to repave the Conway, I assume that's Conway Field parking lot and driveway. Is that just a portion that's in Abington Township? Do we maintain that parking lot? Do I have that mixed up? I thought the fields were in, that's our field?
It's our field, but it's in Upper
It's in
Dublin.
Upper Dublin, okay. I always,
Depends on which part.
Conway Field is in Upper Dublin, but we do maintain the fields. I will double check on that, but I think we have always maintained the parking lot and the driveway in. But the field itself is technically in Upper Dublin.
gotcha.
So, and we keep that in there because we do access it from that side.
Makes sense. All right. That's it. Thank you for your indulgence, everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner Sanchez. Any other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Fry.
Two things. So, Mark, can we, in the objectives for the code enforcement, can we add in the rewriting of the saldo? I didn't see that, and is there anything that has to be, or is it already, any expenditures budgeted for that? Because I know that's something that you wanted to get done this coming
No,
year.
I believe, Commissioner, that's already accounted for in your contract with Montgomery County Planning Commission. We can certainly add it to the goals and objectives. The county's model ordinance is actually being distributed to the Planning Commission next week,
Okay.
so that they can have the balance of the year to review the model ordinance, so that if the board would like, we'll get started on the project after the first of the year.
Thanks, Mark. And then, managing I'm sorry, this is for the manager. Thanks, Mark. Managing capital projects, do you have something in place going forward to make sure that we don't have any unnecessary cost overruns, or that your office or project managers within the township are overseeing anything and making sure that there are no unnecessary costs through capital programs?
Yes, I think we have to keep in mind, I'm very fortunate that Mr. Michelow is going to continue on. One of his roles is going to be to basically assist me in managing all capital projects. And there's a few other special projects that we have. And then, of course, the new engineer, when they're on board, and Kevin's going to play a much more active role going forward.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Heffler?
Not a question, it's a comment. Just at a higher level, I wanted to say, I think this is a terrific budget, and I wanted to congratulate Rich and Kevin and Jeanette and all the department heads out there. Your summaries in the beginning were outstanding, and it was very thorough, very understandable. You know, in my short time on the board, we have been working to wean the township away from the use of savings to fund ongoing expenses. And the fund balance policy was a step in the right direction, but it's not until this budget this year where, for the first time since I've been involved, we're not using any savings to fund operating costs. And what that means is that we have the ability, if there are excess revenues, to redirect them into areas of priority that are not ongoing operating costs. And I think this represents a new day for us here in Abington, and I'm delighted to see it. So thank you all for your efforts.
Thank you, sir. Comments from commissioners? Commissioner Myers?
I have two questions, and if you touched on this, forgive me, because it's a lot of information. Going to the organizational structure chart that you did, the area in orange, I'm sure that the communication and public affairs person, is that built into this budget? Is that? Well,
Why
shouldn't we talk about that? Because
I would love to.
many of us, I hope many of us, think that should be built into the budget. That should be a position that's created. Certainly in this day and age with social media as the most incredible communication tool, since we no longer really have a real viable newspaper, that's incredibly important.
Let me say this. You know that I've advocated that from actually prior to day one.
Mm-hmm.
We took it out because we wanted to drive down revenues to an even lower, to be more conservative. We feel very confident in, I'll let Kevin speak to this, that if this was something you wanted to do, and I know I want to do it, and that's why it's in orange, and so I appreciate you bringing it up. I believe it's an extremely important position because it's not just communications, it's community affairs, it's public affairs.
It's huge.
It's constituent service. It's finding the right person. I won't say how disappointed I am that right person isn't available anymore. But let's just say that we could do so much more for the public in communications and reaching out. And we can do it by being less conservative on revenues. And I guess we're about $95,000. So if we were less conservative on revenues, we could still hit our revenue numbers and not have to, and still fund that position. But frankly, I was just so driven by making sure that revenues and expenses were equal, and that one of the concerns I have with revenues very simply is this. There's a lot of uncertainty with Willow Grove Mall. And I didn't want to get in a situation where we became less than conservative on our income tax and some of the other numbers. And Kevin and I, we literally went through this right up until last week. And should we put it in or shouldn't we put it in? And I instructed him to take it out. But I do think that it's absolutely necessary. If everyone believes that we should move in that direction, I believe we can do that and fund it by being less conservative in revenues and not having to drop expenses any further. But yes, it's a critical position. Why don't you speak for yourself?
As Manager Manfredi said, we had this in, we had it out, we had it in, we had it out. So I feel that if we put it in at the board's recommendation, I could cover it with revenues and still not use any fund balance. If everything stays copacetic and the same as it is right now.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're saying, Kevin, is that you could conceivably not alter the existing budget and still factor that position into the budget?
Correct. I would, raise the expense by the salary and benefits of that person. Obviously, we don't know who it is, so we budget high in the medical field, but then I could cover it in revenues. without a doubt.
Yeah, to that point, I mean, I concur with Commissioner Myers that this is an important position, I think, with a lot of potential for tremendous strides in resident services, customer service. Would you be more comfortable as a compromise, given your very cogent point about, you know, the mall and its, you know, the relative uncertainty of its future, maybe funding this position as a mid-year hire and kind of meeting halfway?
Well, I think it can be funded. Again, keep in mind, we were taking a very conservative approach to drive to the point where expenses and revenues equaled. And I didn't want to put additional strain on the revenues. It's really that simple. There's no magic to it. I just didn't want to do. A lot of the reorganization was done to kind of make dollars available, and I didn't want to, frankly, add to that cost. So now that we had the numbers, we were really waiting for September ending numbers, and it really became a last minute thing. Yeah, we can certainly bring that on board April 1, July 1, and that would save money. We'd have a better picture. So if we were to increase that and start at April 1 or July 1, I think that would work also.
I mean, I'm honestly just thinking for your comfort level. I mean,
Yeah.
it's again, it sounds like, you know, very rightfully we're very.
If the
we're
economy and the
conservative.
world were different, I would have put it in. But with looking at, we do have a number of people retiring going forward. So I think that we do have the ability to make additional cuts as we go out through this year. Part of this goal setting and that we're going to be looking at and finding ways to be more efficient, I think we probably will be able to find ways to do that. I was just being very conservative, candidly.
I'm sure we all appreciate being conservative, but it seems that every year that we have a sizable surplus at the end of the year, and maybe another compromise so that we could start on this earlier would be to start it out as a part-time position, see where we are financially, and then move it into a full-time position.
I don't think we'll get what we need part-time.
Okay.
Please don't misunderstand me. I feel very strongly that this position is absolutely necessary. It was not an easy thing for me to do, to say, Kevin, take it out. It was very hard, and he knows, he's laughing because
Well, I don't really understand that we have to take it out. I'm not understanding that we need to take it out. I think it is a very important position.
Completely agree.
And I think that the residents of this township are, although we do the best we can with communication, they want more.
Well, if you look at my goals and objectives, you'll see that attaining and achieving the objectives would be much more attainable and more quickly with this position than without it. So I completely agree. I have nothing more to say.
So if that be the case, then somewhere in our budget process, you would need direction from the board to move forward, or?
If the board wanted that position, I would ask that we add a salary in the range of $60,000 and benefits to the tune of about $35,000, so it would increase it about $95,000 if we were doing a January 1.
So I don't, okay, Commissioner Klein.
So do you perceive this person also, I mean, you talk about public relations and communication, but also doing some type of marketing for the township also? Because I think we do an inadequate job of trying to attract businesses into the township. You know, with whatever apparatuses we have here, we need to go further. I mean, I've seen it in other townships, and I think we do less than we should be doing.
I think it would be a brand of marketing, and I think it would also be community relations. It would be, you know, someone who either has the experience to be an events planner, who can handle, you know, for example, the Roslyn event or an Ardsley event or something else. So yes, that would be a part of it. And constituent service for all of you who are driven, or very energized and very engaged with your people, I think it would be another critical component. So the short answer is yes, but it wouldn't be the core of the job. It wouldn't be a core responsibility, but it would be a responsibility.
So, Commissioner Farrell.
Thank you, President Luker. Would we be able to see a job description before we're deciding?
I already have one I can send to you.
Can we get that?
Yep.
And that way, we're not talking about could be or would be, but this is exactly
It's
what it would
already
be.
completed.
Great, okay.
Yeah.
So based on what I'm hearing then, I guess that would lead to my next question before we conclude the meeting, if there's no other points to be brought up, is whether what we just discussed would be brought up at our next budget session, and if so, would it be, if necessary, a meeting on the 26th of October? And the second?
I'm going to ask, we could do it the 26th. I would ask you not to do it that night, out of courtesy to somebody who works very hard on this budget with me.
Sounds like somebody has plans.
Yeah.
It's my wife's 50th birthday, so if I miss that, I could be divorced.
Candidly, it depends on where you want to go next with this process and how many more questions you have. You know, maybe we could meet on the 26th, and Kevin can be excused depending upon what questions you might have.
So I guess to
Bring your wife to the meeting.
We could set it up, we can have like a romantic table. We have
We'll get her,
the
we'll get her a
moonlighting is
cake.
conducive to-
Commissioner Farron's question, you could have that information.
Oh, the job description is already finished.
So I guess
I could send that out to you
prior
Friday.
to adjourning the meeting, my guess the question to the board is whether Thursday, October 26th is necessary.
Let me ask you this. If you're inclined to fund this position, then we would increase that line item by $95,000 to $100,000. I send out, conditioned upon your review of the job description. Do you have other questions regarding anything else? It would really depend upon how many more questions you have about this budget as to whether or not you believe it's necessary to have another meeting.
I don't think it is.
Because that could be something that could be in your proposed budget for November 9th.
Because we could decide that night, one or the other
You
budgets.
decide that night one way or the other.
So, right.
That works.
So I suspect then, if I'm not hearing any comments, it would probably be better to have the October 26th meeting, and at that meeting, decide whether you...
I think I heard just the opposite. Not to have
No.
to consider it on November 9th.
Handle this on the 9th. The idea would be not to have it and handle adding these items in the preliminary budget on the 9th.
Okay, the 9th, November the 9th, okay. All right. So then the question is whether we need or require a meeting on the 26th and the November 2nd.
It sounds to me like the answer is no. It's only required if you believe it is, and it doesn't sound to me like you believe it is.
And there's nothing to stop any commissioner from emailing you guys.
Oh,
questions.
and meet with anyone who'd like to meet if there's any questions, yes.
Broken computer.
So if no one objects, then we would then say we will not require a meeting on the 26th nor November 2nd.
And I would have the proposed budget for your adoption as a proposed budget ready for the 9th.
The 9th, yeah.
And I will have two options for you, one that includes this position and one as you see it now.
Is there anything we need to do with the budget as far as the program that Ed wants to put in?
Is there anything, I think there's information that you asked for that we could provide, but everything else seems to be
I'm talking about
internal.
As far as preparing the budget.
No, because his numbers, everything is to be charged off to the capital projects.
But that would have to be changed on the capital portion.
No, actually it wouldn't, because his numbers, remember I showed you those 4 blocks that are, those 4 projects?
Yeah.
Those costs are in those numbers.
But you still have to bring still have to bring those employees into the budget, correct?
The budget's going to be added to the capital budget, so instead of paying them out of the general fund, sewer fund, or refuse fund, they'd be paid right out of the capital loan money for these projects. So when they do payroll, it's a cost accounting payroll, depending on what the job they're doing. So they submit payroll, there's overlay, there's debris pickup, there's snow. So it would just be another column in Public Works payroll, loan money, projects that they're taking care of. So then we would charge them right to that and see if that works.
I mean, you know this from your line of work. Project costing, all those wages, everything is going to get costed to the job, which is those 4 line items. That $825,000 is in those 4 line items in the capital budget already. You're not seeing them as employee set wages and all of that, because it's in those 4 line items.
Okay.
Correct?
A little bit, okay.
So if there's no other business before we adjourn, and In summary, we'll meet on Thursday, November the 9th. And if there's no other business, any other questions from commissioners? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you for attending.